Hey, Paul.
Hey Fab, how are you?
Good yourself?
Good. I'm doing well.
Nice. So today you want to talk about salespeople, and more specifically, why they fail, or the top reasons why they fail.
Yeah, it sounds it
Always-
sounds sounds a little bit cheesy, but it's actually it's a spin on something that I think could be very positive.
yeah, and obviously the goal here is always to help their bosses, so sales leaders, help navigate these failures because ultimately when one person whatever that expression is, you're only as strong as your weakest link, right? So if you have one or more salespeople that are failing, like the whole team ultimately doesn't do well, right? And a lot, I don't know, it's the last thing, but definitely the one of the things you want to avoid is when you're very dependent on one or two salespeople to make your numbers, right?
Yeah,
Then there's a balance of power that happens, balance of power shift that happens, and you're not scalable, right? Because the more power one salesperson has, the less they're willing to share and to update information and to train others because they like kind of being at the top, which is part of the sales mentality. And so, um, yeah, so the goal here is to take these 5 reasons that you've identified, and we'll kind of help you navigate it. I have notes on what you can do in HubSpot to help you with that on most of them. So let's get started.
for
Number
sure.
one reason.
Right. So number one reason I would say is probably lack of prospecting, particularly with business development reps and any rep that's got to do any kind of development. And when I say lack of prospecting, I should say prospecting in general. They have the wrong approach. We spoke about this last week in our podcast,
Yeah,
and that's one of the reasons. If you're not properly ready to do your prospecting, you don't have the right attitude. It can really it has a huge effect. The interesting thing about this one is I think people know.
yeah,
This won't be a surprise to anyone. Even to the sales reps are having a hard time saying, "Yeah, you're right. I didn't prospect enough." Particularly people who have a long sales cycle, they leave it last minute, and then they get a lull, and then the whole thing happens. And so this is not a surprising one. So we talked about this in our podcast last week. So it's being prepared, it's being organized, it's knowing what you're going to say, and then just getting into the execution mode. We talked about it's like going to the gym. Just once you're ready and you know you're going to the gym, just go to the gym. So just go prospecting, just make sure it happens. So that to me is the most important thing, right?
yeah. Yeah, I agree because I mean, at the end of the day, everything else stems from that, right? If you have an empty pipeline, then it's hard to perfect, master, tweak everything else, identify that you have issues elsewhere. That's the number one thing. And at the end of the day, full pipeline solves a lot of problems. Some of them we'll talk about later, but like some of the things like qualifications and all that stuff, like right, like if it's easier to say no to somebody if you have a full pipeline and you have tons of opportunities than saying no to somebody if they're the only this is the only deal that'll get you through the to your quota. Like it's really hard to disqualify them, right? So,
Exactly.
um,
Well,
yeah,
it's the start of everything, and of course, we've talked about this before. It's your conversation starter. It's just that first step.
yeah,
Um, yeah, absolutely. You want me to
yeah,
jump to
and
number two, or you still want?
no, I wanted to like help people out like in how to build it in HubSpot, and I think
Oh
for
yeah,
me
for
like
sure.
I think obviously at the end of the day, it is a mindset, right? Like going to the gym, right? It's not about having your membership; it's about actually going and hiring a trainer if you need to or whatever. But what I like is it's still in beta, but it's kind of like the prospecting section, and you see all your tasks that are due, all the tasks that you've done, all the tasks that you're still pending. You see your calendar, you see your sequences, you see all that stuff, and all in one place. And because what I found with HubSpot, and I found a lot of CRMs have that challenge, is that prospecting is spread out all over, right? You have your tasks here, you have to go find your contacts here, and you have to find the companies there, and everything's like left, right, and center. So I would definitely encourage people to like, depending on when you listen to this, either opt into the beta or just start using it. It just gives you a nice dashboard of everything you need to do for your prospecting activities. It removes some of the barriers, right? Like
Yeah,
if we keep with that gym analogy, it's easier to go to a gym that's close to your house than one that's 45 minutes away. This is kind of the same thing. It just removes a lot of barriers, makes it easy to know what you have to do next.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and it's probably well, we'll talk about another point that's there, but it's the one thing that you need to organize a lot more than you think you do.
Yeah, yeah, it's just very easy to find excuses not to do it. There's a lot of psychological games there, like there's a lot of rejection, there's a lot of being ignored, there's a lot of treading mud, so to speak, or walking through mud, like doing a lot and not moving very fast. There's a lot of, so it's very hard to prospect, right? You'll go through periods where it's like working super well and it's a lot easier. But you'll go through periods where like nobody's answering your phone, nobody's answering your emails, nobody's answering your LinkedIn messages, nobody's getting back to you, nobody's booking meetings. That gets really hard to get motivated to do,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
to me, it's about removing as many barriers, at least on the operational side of things as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you're CRM, if you're using HubSpot and it's helping you as a sales assistant to do the right things at that stage, for sure it moves forward. But that will be it at any stage. So
If you're not using HubSpot, for sure your reps are having a hard time prospecting.
you can say that, Tab. You can. You know where your allegiance lie. Um,
All
um,
right, next
number
one.
number two, fear of rejection, and this is a state of mind. It's interesting because when reps start, or it's a state of being, and if you're someone who has a large fear of rejection, and sometimes it comes out in different ways. And what do I mean by that is that your fear of rejection will come out like, oh, I don't need to prospect because this person and that person are gonna put me in touch with these people. And if you don't understand, and you don't have the data, and this is where HubSpot comes in. If you don't have your data to know what your success rate is on your calls, on your closing ratio basically means how often am I going to be rejected? And if you're closing 30% of the time, keep in mind that that means you're being rejected 70% of the time. And maybe in some of those, you're self rejecting, but yourself, you're disqualifying. But if you have a fear of rejection and you don't get over that, you'll never be a good salesperson, because
Mhm.
rejection is part of sales and you have
Yeah.
to accept it. And it's okay. And it's more of a maturity to realize it's not necessary for everyone to buy your product or service. It's not it's not automatic that everyone will buy your product if you think they need it. You,
Mm.
as a salesperson, you have to make sure that you have the conversation so that they understand that they need it. And will that always happen? No. But if you have a fear of that, you're never going to move forward. But fear of rejection holds people back in a lot of things in their lives. They don't study the things they want to do. They don't move to the places of the world they want to move to. They don't, they don't go on vacations because they're scared. So you really have to fear of rejection is someone who can be fearful, and you have to take it, and you have to get used to it. And I think the best way to get over your fear of rejection is to put someone in a situation where they do get rejected, and you tell them it's normal.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's obviously it's. I mean, I would say it's a bit. It could potentially be more complicated than that, but I mean, yeah. At the end of the day, and we just touched on that when we were talking about prospecting, and like that. It is a factor, right? Especially in prospecting, I'm sure your rejection rate or ignoring rate, which is a form of exception of rejection, sorry, is quite high, right? And the more unknown your brand is, the more it's going to happen, right? And so that's a big one. I mean, it is mainly a state of mind, but what I've what I've seen in HubSpot playing out well is like I like your idea of the reports, kind of showing like where you're situated. Like if your conversion rate is 16%, that means you're getting rejected quite a bit, right? And so knowing that it's maybe normal, but what I found interesting is it's a new functionality. I guess we're diving into new functionality. One is there playlists. So what I like is that sales leaders can identify like good calls and get salespeople to be able to easily access them and listen to them. And I find like that's a good motivator for salespeople to like, okay, like good calls can happen and you listen to them and you know what
Yeah,
to say and you get reminded that it can go well as well. Yeah.
yeah. And
Um,
what I also say to people, sorry, I just want to,
yeah.
is right. Listening good calls, seeing how things can go well, see how things can go bad, and not taking it personally when you do get rejected, because they're not rejecting you personally, they're rejecting the offer of what you're trying to help them with, and that's okay, and that's what you have to boil down to.
Yeah.
That's what you have to get used to. But if you're someone who's always used to being told yes on everything, then it stops you. Sorry, a little parentheses. Come back to what you were
Yeah.
saying. Apologize.
No, that's it. So to me, I mean, it is a state of mind. So I think that's a lot more of a managerial thing. But in terms of helping your reps out, I think the reports to identify like that they're within the norm, I think helps. I think playlists of great calls help. Just get that, even though it's short lived, like that boost of energy to like I could do this type of thing. And you too as a sales leader, getting those reports to see which reps maybe are struggling compared to the others. Could be an indication that there's something to work on. Yeah, those are probably the three things I'd work on. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love the list of great calls, but I also like the list of great calls where you still get rejected.
Yeah.
I like the fact that you're realistic in knowing that rejection is just part of life, and it's not like being rejected by the girl you like, because that's personal. It's or the guy you like, or the person you like. It's not that. It's not about you at that point. So that's something that's a top of mind situation. Um,
Cool.
so the next one, I would say it's sort of it's a blend of two things. It's lack of organization, but also inadequate time management. And this is very, very common in salespeople. They're not organized because it's an interpersonal thing. A lot of people shoot from the hip. A lot of people just go with the flow. And if it's good economic times, this can work. But then the minute things go a little bit hard, if you're not organized and you don't know what it is that you're doing well or what you're not doing well, and you don't understand and obviously lack of organization can lead to inadequate time management, and then your whole thing falls apart, and then that starts affecting your ego, which starts affecting your pitch, the way you talk, and the whole thing just falls apart. So I would definitely suggest to anybody, even who shoots from the hip, who's really good at what they do and they say they're not that organized, organize yourself to understand what you're doing well. And of course, you know this is, to me personally, for someone who's not naturally organized, where the CRM really plays a huge role. I'll make you happy, where HubSpot plays a huge role. If you have your sales process in there, everything's organized, your task organized, it's your sales assistant and it's helping you do things. So if you have a good CRM, HubSpot, and you're doing it well, it's gonna help you become better organized. And you can tie in your calendar, you can tie in your calls, everything's shooting from one place. It helps those that are not naturally organized become organized, and also the whole time management thing comes in. So keep that in mind. And some people are, I've met a lot of salespeople who are free spirited, and that's what makes them great and they're fun. You don't have to stop being free spirited in your conversation, but you can still have organization in how you do things. And it's like some people used to say to me, well, organization hinders creativity. That's not true. Organization actually helps creativity because it takes the clutter out of your mind. You don't have to remember all these things. You can have it well organized, and then you can focus on your creativity. That's my state. I'm sure you like what I said there, so I'll let you add to it.
No, I mean, you're right. I think, obviously you could dive deep. Like disorganization could probably be a sign of maybe fear of rejection and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Sometimes it plays out
absolutely.
in different ways. So there's, maybe things to look at there if you feel your reps are disorganized. But you're right. To me, the CRM is the best place to do it, right? Because the more your reps can live in the CRMs or their CRM extensions, the easier it is for them to stay up to date, right? Because it's not like, oh, I have to remember to follow up with Sylvie. I need to, I get a task to remind me to follow up. And the tools that I like the most are sequences. So sequences are usually synonymous with prospecting, right? Like you enroll people in a sequence and you get your call task and you get emails being sent out. But I've seen reps use them for various parts of their sales process, right? Like after the first meeting, they'll have like a post first meeting sequence, and then they'll get a prompt to send off a recap email, and then they'll get like a task to follow up a week later, and so on and so forth. And it just removes all need to like organize yourself, right? Because it's already been preset for you. And the other thing that I found really helpful there, and this is really a small micro tactic, is within HubSpot you can create different queues of tasks, and I've helped reps like identify like the really critical tasks, like following up with certain types of prospects and stuff like that, and the least critical tasks, maybe just updating various data points in the CRM that are maybe not as useful, and things like that, or not as critical. Because I've seen a lot of reps, they love the tasks, but then they end up with like 103 past due tasks, and then they give up, right? It just becomes too overwhelming to
Yeah.
tackle. But
Yeah.
to have different cues of like these are the, and then you're critical, you realize okay, you have 5 to 10, like that's manageable. And
Yeah.
the not so critical, yeah, even if you're at 23 or whatever, you could just do that on a Friday afternoon.
Yep.
It's not a
Yep.
big deal. And so that I've seen help reps quite a bit is just also segmenting their tasks so that they're not all as equally important or as critical, I would say.
Yeah, and the great thing about organization is if you have the proper tools, it will definitely help you become more organized. So, and that's what you're
Yeah.
seeing, right? And it'll help you with your time management as well. So, for sure, this can make a huge difference. And this is something you can change, you know. And you're right; it might come from fear of rejection. It might be based in some psychological situation. But if you truly want to succeed, and you're not trying to self sabotage, creating having tools that will help you organize will make things a lot better for you. Absolutely. The next one is this is very much a rep thing, and I really want to talk about this because um, if you are, I say, poor qualification of leads, and I'm just gonna put it a poor qualification. Some people tell me, I never let go of a lead no matter what. Well, that's kind of a waste of your time and energy too. You need to have established requirements for you to decide what how you're going to qualify these leads. And if they don't meet those qualification needs, you should be dropping them. And often people qualify everything is because they don't have enough in their pipeline because they haven't been prospecting enough. So they'll have just 10 prospects where they should be dealing with 50. So they'll
Right.
never get let go of those 10 prospects because they're automatically qualified because it's the only ones I have. Well, that's why you need to have a good qualification process. And this goes down into your sales process. If you have a good sales process, if you're always qualifying and you're always figuring out whether this is a good situation, it'll help you tremendously in moving forward. And a lot of reps don't do this properly, so they spin their wheels. They're good at prospecting, they're not fearful of rejection, they're well organized, but they're not qualifying properly. So, what that does is it affects their closing ratio because they're spending 20, 30, 40% of their time on leads that they shouldn't be spending their time on. So, you really need to
Mm.
know, you need to talk about this. You need to think it over. You need to really analyze how your sales process works and how to qualify those leads and know when they're not. You should be deciding as a sales organization when you should not be moving forward with this lead when it really is dead.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's something I see a lot of sales leader getting better at helping reps identify critical things to identify throughout the sales process. And HubSpot is just making it certain fields mandatory to move a deal from one stage to the next. I do find that maybe not enough time is spent on the concept of qualifying, right? Like when I'm at stage one, what are the critical things that I need to know before I move forward to the next stage? And when I move to the next stage, what are the critical things to do to, because disqualifying obviously happens a lot at the beginning, but it does, and you mentioned this before, it does happen throughout your sales process, right? Like before you're going to submit a proposal, there's some things now that you've spoken a few times that you might realize it just makes them not a good fit that you weren't
Yeah.
able to identify early on. So to me is like, yes, making certain elements mandatory to move a deal from one stage to the next, but it's also making it qualification based, which is important. There's some things that just make it like I'm not going to waste my time building a proposal for something that even if I win it, I might be losing revenue, I might be cutting into my margins, I might be in almost guaranteeing that I'm going to have a client churn in a month or in a year or whatever. Um, these are all important, and there's things that you figure out throughout your sales process that can help you determine whether you should pull the plug, so to
Yep.
speak. And I definitely think that your HubSpot is probably one of the better. I mean, obviously there's the training and the role playing and all that stuff that we've talked about, and that happens outside. But it's definitely a tool that helps. That's there in the front lines with your rep and help them identify what's a good fit and not a good fit.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I know we're aligned on this one because we've talked about it a lot. So, it makes a lot of sense, but it's something that's not top of mind for a lot of salespeople. And this should be, this is a list for salespeople, but it's also a list for sales managers to be aware that these are the top 5 reasons that salespeople don't succeed is because they're falling on these things, and there might be other ones for certain people, but these are the main reasons that really engender lack of success. Of course, there's a whole
Yeah.
desire to, and your attitude and whatnot. But if we're talking about specific things, that falls into that. So of course, you need to have the right desire and you need to have the right intelligence to be a salesperson. But that you don't. It's harder to fix because you're born with those.
Yeah.
The next one I want to talk about is it's a subcategory, but it's been happening to me a lot. So I want to talk anecdotally, but it's lack of follow up. I'm amazed at how many people reach out to me on LinkedIn and trying to sell me something, and they have a good first intro, and then I throw them off with a little bit of an answer, because I want to see how good these salespeople are, and they don't follow up, and they don't
Yeah.
properly follow up, and people give up too easily. And
Yeah.
I think I personally I think it's because they see it like a date. Oh, I'm asking the person on the date. They say no, and I won't harass them. But in sales, it's different. You need to follow up. You need to speak to people. You need to continue the conversation. You need to have those conversations, and you need to again follow back to number two. Not be fearful of rejection in your follow up. It doesn't mean you should be harassing, but you should be using follow up in a proper way. And again, a good CRM can make a huge difference in helping you follow up because it's reminding you when to do it. It can all, and then you should also have obviously not just the reminders, but how to do it, what you're bringing up, what you're going to talk about, and always making sure that you have your hand on the pulse of your potential prospect to understand why it is that they're hesitating. And if you decide whether you should be disqualifying or moving forward, but some people just don't do that. They don't do properly. It's part of being disorganized as well. I mean, all of this flows together, right? But it's something that can
Mhm.
have a huge effect.
Yeah, I agree. I think, and maybe that's, maybe speaking more from personal experience, I think lack of follow up is often also a consequence of, poor qualification skills. I think, when we don't qualify, we move leads down further and further down our sales pipeline, and at some point it just becomes like this person is just not a good fit, right? Like, why would I prioritize doing a proposal or following up with somebody who I know is not a good fit, right? I'm just kind of keeping them in my maybe bucket in case my pipeline is empty bucket. But but so to me that's usually a symptom. So I agree with you, tasks and all that do help with follow-up. I think what's critical too in your CRM is to really spend a lot of time helping identify, and it goes with the poor qualification skills, which you said it was a subset of, but um, is spending time to help identify who's a good fit and who's not a good fit. I think it should really be straightforward for a rep to see this is a good fit lead, this is not a good fit lead. I'm not going to spend time on my good fit leads. Maybe marketing can work with them. Maybe there's some criteria that could eventually make them a good fit lead, but right now they're not. Um, because I think it's easier to follow up with somebody who is a good fit and we know is a good fit. And that's where I find like all these LinkedIn automations and all that stuff, which just kind of blanket out there some vague, uh, ICP. You end up, it's like I don't know that if it's still used, but when you're fishing in the ocean and they use these massive nets that pick up like absolutely everything.
Let's hope they don't use those anymore.
That's the same thing, right? You're just going raking super large and grabbing everything, and within that, there's only a tiny percentage of people you can actually work with. So to me, lack of follow up it could be a sign that we're just not qualifying, and we need to use our CRM, like our HubSpot,
That,
to add
that's
very specific
true.
criteria. This is a
Yeah,
great lead. This is not a
yeah.
great lead, and because of that, I'm always fearful when companies try to over automate everything, right? Like LinkedIn outreach automation, like too much, because then that's when you rake super large, right? Like when there's too much automation, you become lost in everything. So,
I, I, I totally agree with
yeah.
you. They're intrinsically linked, and if it's too large, if you're casting too large a net, and you're not thinking, you're improperly qualifying, and hence your follow up will suffer because it's just too large, and you're not, it's a bit of a hacky approach, but um, absolutely, totally agree with you. There's one thing I want to
Yeah.
mention. We've talked about this before. The whole activity and methodology thing. So activity, a lot of these are activity based, right? So prospecting is very activity based. Yes, it
Yeah.
has some method in it, but it's more activity based. Fear of rejection is all methodology. It's all about how you feel inside, and that's important. That's your state of mind. And as a salesperson, you've got two things. You got your state of mind, what you know, which falls into methodology, and then you got your activities, things you do. So if you don't have the right desire, if you don't have the right state of mind, all these activities are going to falter. But sometimes some people have the right state of mind, but they're really disorganized, so their activities suffer. So you need to have a balance of both those things being strong that'll help you through. So, number one's a little bit, yes, more activity based with some methodology. Fear of rejection is mostly about your attitude. Lack of organization is very much activity based, and structuring yourself. It has a little bit of method, but structuring yourself. And there's one we skipped that I didn't mention that I want to come back to, and I'll mention it last, which is very, very important, is the inability to handle objections. And the
So there we go.
inability,
Six. You're getting a special one.
yeah, you're getting a special one. It's an inability to handle objections, which is also about your attitude and whatnot. But a lot of people say, "Oh, how do I handle objections?" And that's all methodology. And I want to
Hmm.
mention that because some people, their fear of rejection comes from the fact they're afraid of objections. Their lack of follow up is because they're afraid of objections. Their poor qualification is because they're afraid of objections. Because that's all methodology. It's all about who you are and how you present it forward. So we've also
Hmm.
talked about this a lot, and it's about asking open ended questions. It's about understanding the objection and not fearing the objection. It's about
Hmm.
facing it and saying, well, okay, my client, my prospect has an objection. Obviously, something's holding them back. Instead of me fighting them and trying to push back, which is what a lot of people think they have to do, let me find out what it is and let me find out if it has true value. And if it does have true value, I will disqualify them and let them go. And if to me, I think it's wrong, I will challenge them in a polite way to try to make them see a different way of looking at things. But first, you have
Hmm.
to ask questions to really dig. So that's your bonus number six, which has an effect.
Yeah, I mean, handling objections, and I know it was last week that we spoke about the discovery call, and I think handling objections kind of, it's not similar, obviously, but it kind of goes hand in hand in terms of, there's a lot of training and role playing involved with helping reps overcome objection, because some objections come up regardless of where you're selling, right? There's some sort of a price objection at some point, like some come back, but some are very industry specific and company specific. Um, so there's definitely a lot of training and role playing involved there. What I like there, obviously, and I know we've talked a lot about this, is using playbooks. And what I've seen some people do is they'll identify like the top 5, 10, whatever the number is, the types of objections that reps get at various stages of the process. Right, early in the process, the sales process could be, some of the objections are a lot more, why use you, we don't need you, we don't have budget for this. These are some of the top objections that you get. And some of the top objections that you get usually later in the sales process is like, this is too expensive, blah blah blah, right? And so by adding in your playbooks kind of these battle cards, so to speak, as to, okay, well, if somebody tells you it's so expensive, kind of understand that maybe you didn't do some of your discovery properly, so maybe try to restart some of that, whatever the solution is. But I've seen that being helpful for reps, because especially younger reps that haven't been even selling for very long, in the company for very long, or in the industry for very long. It's quite helpful um, to get very specific training, because these objections come back, right?
Absolutely. And having a playbook of typical objections, and then having a playbook of how to deepen and handle or talk about those objections can go very, very long way. Absolutely. But
Yeah,
it's all about your attitude, and it's all about your openness to really willing to help the prospect achieve what is important for them. And once you have that, once you have the playbook, once it's operationalized, once you understand what you're doing, it'll help you a lot for sure.
yeah.
So yeah, so these are the top 5 plus 1.
Haha.
And press surprise one. There's always a surprise one. So
Always.
yeah, and I think as a sales manager, if you have there's a lot more that can happen. But if you have your eye on these things, it really help your team move forward. And as a sales rep, if you have your eye on these things and you make sure you're organized, operationalize with your CRM, and you have the right attitude and you do the right activity, I think you're already off to a better start if you just take the time to analyze these things and move forward.
Very cool. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Fab.
We'll talk soon. This is great. This is useful.
See you, everyone. Thanks. Bye bye.
Bye.